Burnout is a global issue. The World Health Organization has identified this as a workplace challenge. The CDC, National Institute of Health, and so many organizations have identified this as a big hurdle. In fact, 95% of HR leaders say that burnout is a key issue in retaining talent. And Deloitte has a study out, and they say that over 70% of leaders, C-suite leaders, are looking for opportunities that can provide them for better work-life balance. So this is a serious issue, and I wanted to think about how to use communication skills, engagement skills, specifically managing up to help us reset priorities, reset expectations, have those honest conversations so that we can address burnout. And if we're in that process, how to reverse it. And if we're not, how to avoid it. So I have with me Julie Quinne, who is someone I met only a few years ago and during the pandemic. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So we met during the pandemic, and we hit it off, and I learned so much just by attending some of her sessions. She's who I wish I knew when I first became an HR leader. Okay, so this is going to be a great conversation, and we're going to be talking about managing up, resetting expectations to address burnout. And so Julie is and I wanted to pull this up because I had it up before, but just wanted to share with you a little bit about her background. But you all received her bio, so you know a little bit about her. But Julie is an HR strategist, a leadership strategist and coach, consultant, HR thought leader. And she has significant experience, decades of experience as an organizational and C-suite leader. She is the creator of Uncommon Leadership Framework and the founder of the Uncommon Collaboratory. So Julie, thank you so much for joining me for this important conversation. And is there anything you want to share with the group?
Oh, thanks so much, Jessie. I'm so glad to be a part of this today. You've got a great, strong series, and I always love to see what you're doing. So thank you for inviting me here today. Not much more to add, just really happy to be here. And for those who are interested in learning a little bit more, I do have a webinar coming up next Wednesday on how to get executive buy-in for critical HR priorities. So if folks are interested in that, I can put that link in the chat after our conversation.
Okay, great. Yes, and take advantage of that. I've participated in a number of her webinars, always something to learn, always great tips and techniques that you can readily apply in the workplace and in your personal life. So let's talk about what managing up actually is. What does that look like?
Yeah, what is it? It depends, right? It depends on what we're trying to do, what our experience is. So for instance, I'll just speak from my experience myself and from what I've coached managers and leaders and employees on when they're involved in a situation where they might need to manage up. We might manage up when we are finding ourselves overwhelmed, overburdened, too stretched, and not able to do the work that we've been assigned. We might be in a position to communicate to our managers up the chain of hierarchy to let them know what our situation is and how it's affecting us, and to ask for help. Another way that we might need to manage up is the team might be experiencing something on the field level in the front lines that the manager isn't really aware of and is conflicting with some of the assignments that they're getting or the expectations. So we need to communicate up to the manager the reality of a situation. And in some cases, we might need to manage up in a way that is about the manager needing to change something about her or his or their approach to something because it's not working really well. So that's giving feedback to a manager. So lots of different ways we can manage up, but essentially it's communicating up the hierarchy in a way that helps us be more successful.
And that's exactly right. You know, I do this session called Managing Up, and you could apply it in different ways, but it's essentially communication up the chain of command across the organization. And it benefits the people who work with you and for you. I call it giving and receiving context. Right. So in your career, can you share, and really as a consultant, and you've been a business consultant and leadership strategist for I think over 13 years, you've started your business, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So so how has that worked in real life for you? Particularly when you have a leader who's a bit difficult.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Luckily, and this is probably not something everybody has at their disposal, but my undergraduate degree was in interpersonal communication and rhetoric. So right there, I was equipped a little bit more than usual to find the right words to say difficult things to folks. So I do find like that I had a leg up, right? But even with that leg up, it's hard. It's hard. In my case, I'll give a couple of examples. In one case, I had a very charismatic CEO. Looked like Superman, carried himself like Superman. Everybody kind of perceived him as Superman.
Mhm.
And we were heading into the financial collapse in 2008, I guess it was 8-9. And he was really needing, what the organization really needed was not so much charisma and Superman like, good looks and charm. We needed Superman's ability to bend steel. And so I needed to give him, as an HR leader, I needed to manage up in a way to say, here's what the organization is experiencing. Here's where your natural strengths have helped and supported the organization. Here's a gap that we need to fill. This is a perfect opportunity for you to fill it. How might you do that, right? Mm-hmm. And so to invite conversation about a gap that needs to be filled. Mm-hmm. So that's one example. And it's tough, you don't know how you're going to be received. But that's something that I was able to build over the course of my HR career, real strong consulting to. That's what it can kind of liken. I liken it to consulting up as opposed to managing up. I'm not managing him in that case. I'm consulting with him about what would be the best for the organization. I'll give one other example that's very personal. I experienced some extreme burnout in 2018 when I was inside a corporate organization. And we were in the middle of a major transformational business change. And I was experiencing extreme burnout from personal and professional factors. And I needed to tell my boss at the time that I needed a break. I needed to manage that conversation, communicating up in a way that preserved my credibility, that preserved my team, that preserved his ability to get work done, and preserved my safety and sanity in my personal situation. So it can take vulnerability, it can take courage, and that's what I found in my own experience, for sure.
And I appreciate you being transparent about some of your experiences. Honestly, I've experienced burnout. And I think in one of my previous sessions, I shared that I was temporarily blind in the left eye during a meeting, and it was a meeting to prep for another session. And I had my team there. I was in transportation at the time. And it was a very intense and very stressful time. But I was in a meeting prepping for this other presentation with the other C-suite leaders and executives from the governor's office. And I was looking at a piece of paper and I told my team, what's wrong with the printer? Like, I can't see anything on the left side. There's like, well, there's writing on both sides of the sheet. I'm like, well, either I'm blind or something's going on. And they're like, Jesse, your face is doing something.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah. And so I went up to this meeting because I put what I was doing ahead of my health, literally. And
Yes.
I know my team was stressed too. And so I helped them manage their stress and I helped them manage their workload, but I wasn't doing that for me. And I wasn't having those conversations with my boss to provide her with context as to what's really happening on the ground, right? So I was in a way like that shock absorbent for my team, and that wasn't healthy. So fast forward, went to the hospital. They asked me what I did. There's like, okay, we understand. So no,
You're an HR person.
right?
You understand.
Yeah, and they knew who I worked for. So it was just like, either you quit your job or you reset expectations and you work around how you balance the day-to-day responsibilities. So of course I got additional support, but then had more honest conversations with my executive, with the CEO, that we are understaffed and we need more support. This is what we need. We can continue to do this work, but this is where we need to maybe make some changes, right? So, and that's why it's so important to get ahead of this, because if you all think about it, we've had the pandemic and there are versions of this pandemic, of this COVID virus. It's just like it's a virus that won't stop. There's increased social unrest, polarization, wars, rumors of wars, monkeypox, you name it. Everything is coming at us. So we're dealing with that. We're dealing with our work responsibilities. We're dealing with our teams, our families, and we haven't had an opportunity to really stop.
Yeah.
We just keep going, and that is a challenge.
And I think, Jesse, you're right. I mean, it's funny, off the top of our head, thinking like, oh, what does managing up have to do with burnout?
Yeah.
And the answer is everything. In many cases, it can be everything. I was just actually consulting with a client earlier this morning, and I used the circle of concern or circle of control. It's something that Stephen Covey has talked about in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And we were talking about, there's that circle of concern, which is out of our control. Yes, we're concerned about the weather, but we cannot control it. So we need to adjust our own expectations with respect to the weather. And, we can, and then there's our circle of influence, which is where can we have an impact, and where should we try to change our situation or our external factors? And there's a place for that. And then there's the circle of control, which is only the things that we can control directly, which is, of course, only ourself, our attitude and our actions. And what we you and I just both kind of described was, making decisions about where things are positioned on our own concentric circles, right? If we sit in that circle of control and say, well, I can just work harder, I can just do more, I can just, stuff these feelings of overwhelm and stretch and just keep on keeping on, maybe we need to stretch into the circle of influence and manage up and notice that, this is not okay for me in the long run, and I need to do something to influence this environment. Same thing with my situation with my CEO, who needed to be somebody different. Mr. Charismatic needed to be, Mr. Fix It. And I could have just been like, well, I'm just going to do what he tells me to do and stay the course. Or I could influence on behalf of what I knew the organization needed. And so it's deciding what are the things we can let go and live with, and what are the things that we really need to step up and step into and communicate for the betterment of ourselves, our teams, and our organizations.
I love that. And it's a almost like a global approach to how you manage your work, as opposed to or a collective or organizational approach to how you manage your work. And that also helps your team. How many of you are team leaders, supervisors, directors? You can either raise your hand or type in the chat. Yes. Yeah. So most of you are. And so I think it's that communication up the organization and really even across the organization, which will help in how you manage the work downstream, right? And I think that also helps in terms of the relationship you have with the team, because now they know that you're an advocate for them. They know that they can trust you with their honesty, with what they're telling you, that they're burned out and they're challenged. And I've had conversations with folks in Fortune 50 companies, government sector, higher ed, and throughout the pandemic, it's always been the same. Throughout the social unrest, we're doing more, we're being asked to do more, and we're tired. And some organizations have done much better, right? And they recognize that, and they've created a space for them to have these conversations with team members, with colleagues, with leadership, so that they can reset expectations and reset priorities. So let's talk about resetting expectations first and foremost. What does that look like?
Yeah, for resetting expectations, this is actually top of mind for me, kind of how to get support for what you think is important, right? And so if we take an example of particularly maybe an HR team, it could be a financial, thinking about an HR team dealing with COVID, all of the changing and new regulations, the influx of employee concerns, the logistics around having people work in hybrid or remote or back in the office. So that's one example. Another example might be a finance department that is undergoing an audit. No fault of their own, it's an audit, it happens, but it is a great deal more of work than it was before. So any of us who are leaders remember probably at the very, very beginnings of our careers, maybe we were interning and we had to go make copies at the copier. And I don't know about you, but 3 out of every 10 times I went to go make copies at the copier would jam, and it would take me like 45 minutes to try to figure out how to get the darn copies made, right? Stuff takes a lot longer than the leader remembers it does, if they ever even have done it before themselves, right? And so the HR team that is dealing with this very real influx of more work and more time and more emotional labor, the very real addition of work to the finance team who is dealing with an audit, which has a level of stress associated with it, right? This needs to be communicated to the organization, to the organization's leadership, and maybe to your own manager. And the way that we need to do that is to reset expectations. What you expect from me up to now is this, and I feel like we've had a good conversation about that. We've been on the same page. What I want to share is the additional work and what is falling off. Let's talk about what expectations are for moving forward. Do we add resources? If we don't add resources, what do we say we're not going to do right now? So really kind of painting the picture of what was, what is, and what the gap is, and then inviting a conversation. This isn't about whining or complaining or saying you can't handle it. it's about really strategically looking at a business problem, identifying what's working, what's not, and inviting a conversation to solve for the gap. And that's how I think about resetting expectations. Jesse, are there other things you think about with in terms of that?
Well, and I think that's important. I love what you said there, because it's not that leaders don't care. I mean, you're all leaders, right? And you report to a leader. It's not that you don't care, you may not know. And what happens is people are afraid to tell you, and you may be concerned about sharing additional information to your leadership that, you know, all is not well, right? The team, they're doing their best. They care about this work. They care about this organization, but they are stretched thin. And, you know, someone, one of my former colleagues, you may know Jamie Tessler, and he was the general counsel at the time, and I was an employment counsel. And he said, not everybody's thinking about you. And I looked at him like, excuse me, sir, that's their job. But he's like, no, everybody has something that they're working on, that they're responsible for. So if you're not communicating, informing, advocating for yourself and your team, no one else is going to do it.
Right.
No one else is going to do it. So it's an opportunity to redefine what success looks like, given the current conditions.
Yeah.
That literally just came to mind. So yeah, it's redefining expectations and redefining what success looks like, given the current conditions. So if anyone has questions, or you have an example, or you'd like to chime in, feel free to type in the chat, unmute yourself, raise your virtual hand, whichever, and we'll get to you. But yes, I think another way that I've kind of reset expectations is during those one-on-one meetings. Great opportunity to provide an update on where things are. In fact, I was in the meeting, and this was the C-suite. We had these regular meetings. Again, it was just an emergency crisis period. So everything was urgent. But we were in these regular meetings, and I was so frustrated, and I didn't do this. So what we're talking about is things that I've learned over the course of my career, but I didn't provide context. I didn't share information about what was happening. And I came out of a meeting that was frustrating, went into a meeting that was also frustrating. And my boss gave us an opportunity to be open and transparent about what's happening. And boy, did I let go. And everyone after that was like, you're gonna get fired. I'm like, well, somebody had to say it. But it opened the door. It was like a watershed moment. Everyone around the table started to share how the way that we were going about the work was actually stretching us thin and focusing our resources on things that really didn't produce the type of results and improvement that we needed in the organization. From there, they actually canceled those meetings because it was so much prep time, so much show time, so much performance without real results and change. Now, I've learned now to do some things in advance before those conversations, especially when I'm frustrated, recognizing, yeah, okay, my boss may not know all these things. So what would you do to prepare for those conversations?
Oh, such a great question.
Mm-hmm.
So another kind of analogy comes to mind. I mean, just like the copier, right? You know, to be frustrated that someone doesn't understand that it took you longer to do the copies than you expect. And I know I'm using a really simplistic example, but we've all probably been there. But to be upset about the copier taking too long and having people's expectations of the time you should be taking to get something done, be off, and getting emotional and not sharing that until someone says, how's your work going? And then blowing up. that's probably not an awesome approach, right? Because, and although understandable, because what are all the rules we're saying to ourselves? Well, this is the copier everybody's using, so I shouldn't complain. They probably know how to copy, and they probably are doing copies too, so they know that it's taking me this long. I might get fired if I speak up. All kinds of stories we tell ourselves about why we should keep all that to ourselves. When in fact, if we share these things and take the initiative to look at our situation objectively, what am I trying to accomplish? What's working as a force for good to that? What's hindering me as a force, a negative force against that? And what can I do about those things? Is there someone I can tell, someone I can ask, something I can learn in order to fix this situation? And that's what your manager hopefully is for, as well as to give you direction. So one way to approach it is to approach it as an inquiry. I've been working on this project, and the resources I have to do with it are not ideal. It's causing delays, and it's causing more work than I think. I think that making this change, whether it's to a copier or something much more complex, would make a big difference. Can you help direct me as to how we might be able to fix that, right? So taking a strategic approach, a holistic approach. What is the business outcome we're looking for? What's working, what's not? What can I do about what's not? And if I need help, where can I get that help? So thinking about that process, as opposed to, I'm frustrated and I need to vent. That's not what managing up is. Managing up is not just simply venting or blaming or any of those things. Managing up done well is somebody who has looked at a business problem, whether it is as simple as a copy machine not working or as complex as two leaders not being on the same page as the rest of the leadership team and causing major cultural issues. No matter what you're dealing with, it's looking at what's the business outcome, what's working, what's not, and what can I do to fix it, and where do I need direction? That's a nice approach for managing up.
I love that. And it's about doing it tactfully.
Yeah.
As you said before, early on in my career, I didn't have the mentor to tell me, okay, this is how you want to approach this conversation, right? This is how you want to provide context. This is how you want to inform your leadership on what's happening.
That's
okay.
right.
Fast forward, I learned, okay, this is not an opportunity to vent. This is not just blowing off steam. This is not sharing frustration, right? Because again, your leader is dealing with a lot. And of course, it's not always going to be perfect. Right? There are going to be times where you're going to let off steam, and there are spaces for that. And it may actually happen in those meetings, but how do you come back from that? Right? Let me ask you that question. How do you come back from that if you're that person who did blow off steam and who made it like a venting session? How do you handle it? How do you come back?
Great question. And I know I can tend to sound like a broken record because I use a very small but powerful set of communication and leadership tools. And I always start with, okay, then what is the business outcome that you want? You want a good relationship with your boss, and you want to show that you are credible and reliable and reasonable and thoughtful, right? So what's helping you there? Oh, I've had a good relationship up until this point that I blew up, and what's hurting you? I was not diplomatic in that moment. I was not thoughtful in that moment. And so same kind of thing. What can I do to repair this situation? And I always, as soon as you know that you have made a misstep, start fixing it, and fix it in service to that business outcome. I want you to know that I am a responsible, professional, credible, reliable person who realizes she made a mistake, right? And wants to correct it. and being able to reach out when you're ready and you have, again, a thoughtful, purposeful communication to say, then you reach out, whether it's an email follow-up right away. You know what? I have to apologize for my outburst. I am frustrated, and here's what I should have said, or here's what I could have said, or thank you so much for your patience this morning. I needed to let off some steam. Clearly that was not the right, the right venue for that. I hope you'll forgive that and know that here's what I'd like, your help with. Getting a mentor or finding an ally to help you craft that message, really, invaluable to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. It's where a coach or a mentor or a friend, a colleague can come in handy.
Yeah, and sometimes even your team, because your team is normally in the trenches with you and you're in the trenches with them, trying to fix things, address things, and produce, right? And so I found one of the ways to prepare for those meetings is literally to meet with the team and say, okay, tell me what's going on. Where are you being stretched? What resources do you need? What's some of the challenges that I'm not aware of that are causing some of these issues for you? And what, how do you need me to communicate that? And it's a listening session. And one of a series that I did for a university, one of the leaders said that he actually creates space for a venting session. It's like, just say what you need to say. And of course, this team has been working with them. They trust him. They know that this venting session will be constructive, and it's not just people just spewing off all kinds of things, but this is where we really are.
Yeah.
And it's a no judgment zone, but a very honest session on what's happening. And then he takes that and cultivates it and wraps it up in a way that is appropriate for the next level, because C-suite and above, everyone is limited on time. And so they're not going to sit there and listen to a venting session, right? They need to know the facts, but they also do care, right? So understanding that people are stretched, that they need more resources, that they need more time, I think is really important. So yeah, having that conversation in advance with someone you trust is so important, because I think there's the conversation before the conversation before the conversation.
Yeah, always good to know what you're going to say, and how you're going to be, not just what you're going to say, but how you're going to be. What is your purpose there? And if we go in desperate to be heard, if we go in positive that we're not going to be heard, those are probably not ideal ways to be as you approach that conversation. If you go in with the purpose of hearing and being heard and having a two-way conversation, that's just a different way of being in that conversation. I think that's just as important, as even more important perhaps, than what you're going to say, right? Because communication is two ways, and the other person has a whole, they've got a lot going on too. Probably they want to vent. So how do you meet them, as an employee, no matter what your level, being ready to have that conversation, but also as a leader, all of us on this call here are leaders in one way or another. And when an employee comes to us, we can help them frame their conversation. We can say, I see that this has really impacted you. I can see that you're really concerned about this. Just being able to say that can calm the person and help them to be more rational. And you can say, tell me what's going on. What is going on? How did that impact you? Tell me more about that. Let them give off steam. That's okay. And then be able to say, what is it that you want ideally? And let's talk about how we can get there. So we can actually help people who are trying to manage up if we're paying attention. So it can be a two-way street.
That is so important. I think leading empathetically is critical, especially in these times. Everyone is just like, okay, I would like to just make it to my vacation or make it to this break or make it until I can just relax. But when you see in a meeting, you can tell by the body language, you can tell by the level of engagement that people want to say something, but they don't feel comfortable. And so one of the ways that I always ran my meetings was just to go around the table and ask everyone what's going on, what's happening, where are you having some challenges, where are there some opportunities. And I've had a few folks share a little bit more than I expected. And sometimes there were a few times where it was inappropriate and I had to have that conversation afterwards. This is not the way you share that, right? Because it then becomes disrespectful and disruptive, right? But then how can we share your concerns in a constructive way? But most of the time it was just, okay, this is really where we are. And we were able to kind of push through some of those issues and address them so that they can be successful. Tanya, you had a question, and feel free to unmute yourself.
All right, so I just wanted to kind of, to your point, just talk about in one-on-ones is a great opportunity. I've been really successful managing empathetically. And the truth is, sometimes there's signs that someone's struggling, but most times there aren't, because they don't want you to know, they don't want you to judge and feel like they don't have a handle on things. So I just made it a rule, and I've learned this, right? Because once I've had my one-on-ones, another supervisor would say, you know, I've been helping so-and-so because she's struggling. And I thought, wow, I just met with her and, you know, I thought everything was great. The truth is I didn't ask that question, like, how are things with you? And I made it a point to always do that. Even when they're showing me and they're telling me like the best stories and all of their, you know, successful reporting and all of the stuff that they're doing, you know, and I think it changes your relationship with that person. They feel that's a safe space where they can open up and talk to you. And it just helps validate whatever it is they're going through. You know, I may not be the person to resolve it, but I could at least, I'll, you know, do whatever I can to pull in HR or, you know, direct them to an outside counselor or someone that they can talk to or whatever. But I think I've, you know, been most successful by just asking that question of everybody separately and not in an open forum. And then you'd be surprised the stuff that comes up. And, you know, it just kind of also reminds me when I know these backstories, oh, that's why the report was late. And oh, that's why she called out 2 days in a row. And oh, you know, and they didn't want to say it. And frankly, no one really needs to say why they need a day off, right? And I tell people that also, if you need to take personal time off, don't feel like you have to explain, oh, well, my daughter fell and she was riding her bike. And you have the personal time, you can use it. I never want anyone to feel that I'm basing my decision on the level of their problem according to however I feel. So I'd rather not hear that full story. And you want the time, you have the time, you know, unless it's something, you know, where it's a long stretch of time, then I absolutely will need a little bit more, and it won't be me. You just have to kind of run that by HR, and most likely they'll need documentation from somebody else. But for the most part, you know, I never want anyone to think that a decision's coming with a biased feeling, and, you know, so I'd rather not hear it. Use the time, take care of yourself, and we will see you when you get back. So I just think, you know, and to your point, the one-on-ones is a great space, you know, and then, you know, maybe nothing's going on at the moment for that person, but they'll know, oh, next Wednesday, I'll have her ear and I'm going to have to, share something because it's starting to affect my work life. So it's like, it's letting them know this is our space and we can talk about, performance and then your mental health, not in depth, but just tell me what's happening. Can I do something? And then sometimes resetting expectations, all right, let's make a list of everything you have on your plate and let's organize them in order of importance. And the truth is, once I hear that, it's like, oh, okay, take those 3 off. It's not, that's not something that has to be done immediately. And then just work on that one thing and it'll be fine. So, some people are holding on to a whole host of things that's going on in their head and in fear of being judged and, just not looking like they're able to do the job. So that's all. I'm sorry. I can talk ever.
Great.
I love it, right, Julie? I think these are excellent points. It's helping your employees, helping your team members, and even helping your colleagues manage better, but also to feel more comfortable, to know that there's a place that they can go and be honest about what's happening. They may not do it then, but if you have a routine, if you have a time, they can plan for it. And when they are comfortable, they can come to you. I love that. I love that. Julie, any thoughts?
Yeah, you touched on so many really wonderful things. One thing that jumped to mind when you were telling, using the example of, seeing what's on your plate and going, oh, that can wait. Great way to manage up at any level. If you've been given a project, asking at the beginning of the project, what does success look like? By when do you need this? Is there anybody else that's going to be, needing to be consulted? Is there anything in particular you're looking for as part of this project? You don't want to ask so many questions that you're holding up the whole thing, but to your point about like, oh, this is not a priority, or this is not urgent, or you do have more time. Folks, they'll get a project and they'll think it's due next week when no, this is a couple of months that I'm expecting, right? But neither really, thought to say what their expectations were. So expectation setting is huge. One-on-ones, if you don't have one-on-ones and you want them, that's an opportunity to manage up. When I don't have regular connection with you, I find myself unable to make decisions as easily, or I end up giving people the wrong information functionally. That's why one-on-ones are so important. Can we commit to doing, once a week or once every other week? All really great ways to think about how to communicate with your manager so you can be successful, so that they can be successful. And great tips, Tanya. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And so there is the other thing I was thinking about was sometimes you're new to an environment or you're new to working with a particular leader and you don't know how to approach the conversation, or you may not know how to approach a colleague who might be working on a project with you, or you're waiting for something from him or her. And it's just gathering information from other people who may have been there and who know how to best approach the situation, how to gather information so that when you have the opportunity, you can share that. And then you have leaders, managers who are just really busy. So trying to get a hold of them is not always possible. And so working with colleagues and working with others who know how to get on the calendar or how to communicate or make sure that the information is being shared with this person so that you can then reset expectations, I think is critical. Tanya, go ahead.
You just touched on something that just I won't say recently happened, but I just remembered. What about when your boss, like my boss, is in a new role? And we're starting to do these one-on-ones, and maybe they didn't figure out what that structure looks like and what they're expecting. So, what I found helpful is I created an agenda myself with like maybe 8 bullet points of what I've been working on. And then I could briefly touch on each one of those and talk about where I'm getting pushback, or maybe I'm, there are any barriers, and what would be helpful for me. And doing that allows the CEO or whoever understand how to manage me, right? This is the kind of feedback that I'm going to give you. You're going to give back to me, and hopefully I'm looking for some guidance, right? So here's my list. Hand it to you. I'll start talking, I'll go through from 1 to 5, and let's talk about it. And then, next steps, when we have our next one-on-one, I'll go over the couple of things that I spoke about, and then anything new that's come up. And it was received really well. And I believe, I don't know if it's true, but in the end, she was like, wow, that was really helpful, and probably will use that same format going forward with other folks, right? Tell me what you're doing. Let's talk about it. And then where can I help you? And then in the end, before I left, she said, anything else in between that comes up, just reach out and shoot me an email. But at least at that point, everyone, this person knew exactly what I was doing. And if it ever came up in another conversation with maybe their boss, they could totally speak on, okay, so-and-so is doing X, Y, and Z, and just kind of reporting out would be helpful. So I don't know. That's something that I think has been helpful for me when you have a brand, and I've never had a brand new boss, but this was definitely different for me. And I struggled in my office thinking, how am I how is this meeting going to be structured? I don't think there is a structure, because I usually get something emailed to me with some bullet points to say what we're going to talk about, and then I'll add something, and then when we meet, we go over the agenda, but it didn't happen. And I thought, I didn't want to go in there just running things off of the top of my mind. So I thought, I'm just going to propose this and say, we can follow this agenda, or we can do whatever you have planned. And she was like, oh, this is perfect. And I said, oh, good. So it worked. So it could have went south and said, well, you're not going to be in control of this. Like, I don't know. It worked. I don't know if it's going to work for anybody else, but I think it's a good strategy to keep in your back pocket.
It's a beautiful example. Yeah, that's a beautiful example of managing up. And it takes some courage, because you don't know how it's going to be received. Mm-hmm. And if somebody could respond harshly. Yeah. And so to be prepared for that, and know, it's a little bit off topic, but knowing that anybody's negative response to something like that is more about them than it is about you. Right. And so being able to take that step and that vulnerability, that courage to say, here's what I'd like to propose, because this has been successful for me, but of course, if you have a different idea, I'm happy to do something else. And then just being prepared, for it to be okay or not okay, and keep yourself safe through that. Yeah. Anyway, I know we're coming up to time, so.
Yeah, and as we're coming up to time, I just wanted to offer again, if you have any thoughts, questions, or comments, feel free to type them in the chat, raise your virtual hand, and we'll get to you. And Julie, if you can think about 1 or 2 more tips or techniques you would share with the group, that would be great. But right now, Demetria says, yes, I just started a new job and I had to reach out to my manager because I had someone who is considered a leader on the team reach out with some unreasonable tasks. And I needed to set expectations with my manager so that proper expectations could be set with that leader. And that's important. I think we're all going to move from one role to another. And if we're at an organization and we've been there for a while, there's still going to be people who are coming into the organization. Right. And so having that conversation ahead of time, whenever you can, And asking questions is almost like, okay, how do you lead? What do you need from me? Right? How can I make this a successful working relationship? What information do you like? How often do you want it? I mean, communication is as much about asking the right questions, listening, and gaining context than just speaking, right? Julie, what is one other technique you would share with the group when it comes
Yeah.
to managing up and resetting expectations?
One thing that, again, one of my fundamental, anchors of communication is the assertive statements. When, the impact, and ideally. So when I don't have regular meetings with you or connections with you, the impact is I'm not able to speak as confidently to my team or with the other functional areas to represent our larger department. Ideally, we would have some regular connections to exchange what's going on. How can we solve for this, right? What could we do? So that when the impact and ideally, and then the invitation to help solve for it is a great framework for almost anything you need to do, but managing up, it's a great framework for managing up. I will share one other great way to think about it as well is doing all of the homework you can possibly do before you get there. And this actually came from a management tool that I teach called the Manager's Magic Potion. And it's for managers who, when somebody comes in with a problem, you help them to frame it. Tell me more so that you can let them vent. What have you done so far? So that you can find out how far they've gotten on their own. What do you think you'll do next to see what their plans are, if they have any? What obstacles do you foresee? What's in your way? And how can I help? So this is the Manager's Magic Potion is a great framework for keeping things where they belong in the employee's responsibility bucket, unless they can't handle it. And then you can take it. I use that same thing inside out for managing up. Tell the manager as much as they're willing to hear about the situation. Tell them how far you've gotten with what you've tried to do so far. Tell them what you think you would do next or what you would like to do next. Tell them what obstacles you think you're facing or you're worried about facing, and tell them how they can help. Because managers are busy and they're not thinking about you, as Jesse found out earlier, right? They're at least not your whole world. So those are two great ways to frame things in a diplomatic, business-oriented, outcome-oriented way that'll get you, better results than otherwise.
I love that. And I always say, it's not that people don't care. They may not always know what to care about when it comes to this, right? So managing up, resetting expectations to address burnout is just recognizing we've been going through so many challenges over the last few years. And I think we've probably experienced some burnout before that. But I think now globally, and here in the US, people are more comfortable talking about it. And there are, studies from Deloitte and other organizations, the CDC, the World Health Organization. They're talking about burnout, talking about mental health. And for me, it's about being a better leader, right? Creating that space where people can share information, teaching them how to do it. But if you're in that position, being courageous enough to recognize there are some things that are within your control and there are things that are not in your control. So how do you share information, provide context, get context, so that you can inform those in influential positions or the other decision makers on what's actually happening on the ground, so that you can still get the work done, do it tactfully, but also be able really to preserve the energy, the talent of your team so that they don't leave and go somewhere else, right? So managing up and resetting expectations is a critical skill I think anyone at any stage in their career can employ. I want to share in the chat Julie's website, and she has a webinar coming up. She shared that early on, but
Yep.
Julie, if you can share that again.
I sure can. Yes, so that's my upcoming webinar. And also, if you're interested, I do have a free community called Uncommon Community, and we talk about leadership every month. So if you're interested in joining the community, or if you have somebody on your staff who might be interested as a development opportunity, I'll give you that link as well.
Yeah, but again, I really appreciate your support and participating in this series. We started in January, and I know it's the summer and everyone wants to take Fridays off, but I appreciate you investing in your career, investing in your leadership journey, and investing in yourself. And I want to thank you, Julie, for sharing these wonderful tips and stories and skills that we all need and can apply to support the people who work with us and for us, and to be more successful. Remember, managing up is about providing information about current conditions so that we can redefine success in a way that's important and appropriate for all of us. Why is my phone ringing? I don't know. But so thank you all for joining. And if you want to ask a question you didn't feel comfortable, feel free to stay back for a minute or two, and we'll get to it. All right. Thank
Thanks
you
so much,
again.
Jessie.
Thank you.
You're
Jessie.
welcome.
Thank you.